Here is what we have. Watching the black-capped chickadees at the feeder outside my kitchen window, the way they seem to snatch a sunflower seed and then bounce away into a branch near the lemon tree. And then another comes down and takes a seed and bounces away. And then another and another. Watching those crisp, alert little birds, I have forgotten to have my problems. Let me say that again. Watching the black-capped chickadees outside my window, I have forgotten to have my problems. What a soothing, calming thought to have in a world overloaded with problems, pandemic, job loss, isolation, divisiveness, political unrest, problems at the gas pump, sleepless nights of worry of trying to figure out the future, not just the next day, 1, 2, 3 weeks ahead, months into the future, overwrought with problems, not to mention Ukraine. I wonder, are problems simply a matter of remembering them? Where did they go while I was watching the chickadees? Another time or activity when I forget to have my problems is when I'm gardening. When I'm down close to the earth in the dirt with living things, planting begonias or deep blue lobelia, suddenly noticing the purple iris in bloom. For hours, I can completely forget to have my problems. Take the time for a moment to reflect. Are there activities or times when you've forgotten to have your problems? I bet there are. It makes you wonder where your problems come from. What is their source? Watching the chickadees at the feeder in the kitchen window, I've forgotten to have my problems. It's sort of a Zen koan. For those of us who might say, a koan, I'm not sure what that is, here are a couple of attempts at definition I found online for K-O-A-N, koan. A koan is a riddle or puzzle that Zen Buddhists use during meditation to help them unravel greater truths about the world and about themselves. Or another attempt, a koan is a puzzling, often paradoxical statement, anecdote, question, or verbal exchange used as an aid to meditation and a means of gaining spiritual awakening. Watching the chickadees, I've forgotten to have my problems, is a kind of koan for me, a means of gaining greater truth about myself and awakening. And it helps me to be here now, exactly where I am. There's another Zen koan which I think is quite beautiful and which I'm curious about. It goes, each branch of coral from under the sea, each branch of coral holds up the moon. Each branch of coral holds up the moon. What can that mean? I first heard this koan from John Tarrant, whom some of you may have heard of or know, even since he's a psychotherapist, but he's also the Roshi or head teacher at the Pacific Zen Center in Santa Rosa. He grew up in Tasmania, an island state off the coast of Australia. He talks about how as a youth he used to go out to the Coral Sea to watch the big mother ships go by. And I understand his affinity for coral, having spent much of my early life visiting my grandmother in Key West, which is built partly on a great coral reef. I remember as a child, the coral under that transparent sea was so beautiful and so plentiful. We'd watch angelfish and brilliant parrotfish and tiny bright minnow-like fish, yellow, wind in and out of the coral. Every branch of coral holds up the moon. That's also a comforting thought for me. It says to me, we don't have to do it alone. Each branch is holding it up, whatever it is. Whatever problem we might have, there are an infinitude of branches of all sorts working together to hold it all up. I can feel my shoulders relax. The chickadees at my feeder, the nuthatches, the titmice, each one holds up the moon. A great weight is lifted. When we appreciate the gift given us here now, the gift of life, there can be a great opening to joy, an opening to light, and even in the dark. In one of his early primetime talks, a year ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, but our president, Biden, said, and I quote, "Finding light in the darkness is a very American thing to do." Well, I was struck by this statement in particular because I had been reading, in the process of rereading actually, John Tarrant's book, The Light Inside the Dark. It's a book that was applauded by many. One reviewer says of Tarrant's book that it offers us a way to gain access to the irrepressible seeds of hope which lie barren, yet ready to bloom in fallow and dark times. So his book is a book for these times. In one chapter, he deals with the notion of, quote, not doing, close quote. Or another way of saying it is, in quotes, doing nothing. So if I understand what he's getting at least to some extent, my moments at the sink watching the chickadees at the window are a time of not doing. Not doing, Tarrant says, is not the same as ordinary laziness. He writes, in ordinary laziness, we avoid something we ought to be doing. It's a process of distraction, and it takes hard work to distract ourselves from the internal commands, like you ought to be writing your sermon, or you ought to be doing one thing or another, washing the dishes, going to work. When we truly do nothing, he says, a fertile, widening silence appears. We rely on the stillness that is everywhere present. When we truly do nothing, we allow that falling can be good, that arms might catch us when we do fall, that the world might sustain us. We respond naturally, witnessing the web of life of which we are a part. And he uses those very words that you use are so familiar with. The web of life of which we are a part, much naturally, much as water runs downhill and the white clouds before the breeze float. I would add that the moments when the chickadees grab a sunflower seed and fly off into the lemon tree is one of those naturally natural things to witness in the web of life. And it's one of those things that allows us to imagine that that web of life we're all a part of can actually sustain us when we fall. In other words, every branch of coral holds up the moon from the greatest to the least. We don't have to hold that world up by ourselves. We're part of the web of life. Nothing could be more Unitarian Universalist. That's part of our purposes and principles. Tarrant goes on to say, quote, after a certain point, knowing and effort don't bring us into closer harmony with eternity. Knowing and effort don't bring us closer to harmony. It's our love for fragile creatures that provides a root. The root of St. Francis of Assisi speaking with the birds. The root taken by a Japanese poet, Issa, who, concerned for the little creatures of the world, writes a poem, a haiku. Don't worry, spiders, I keep house casually. It's the root or path or way of that interdependent web of which we are a part. The world comes to us then, and we belong in it. At last, we are at home in this fleeting life, Tarrant says. The great teachers from Western and Eastern cultures alike have a reverence for the smallest among us. The hymn we sang or hummed or followed along with, all creatures of the earth and sky. Those are words that were attributed to St. Francis. And the web of life of which we are a part bespeaks primarily of relationships, a web of life. Primarily, it's an image of relationships. It is through relationships that we gain spiritual awakening. It is through relationships that we unravel truths about the world and about ourselves. So in her poem, Small Kindnesses, which Bonnie read so nicely, by Danusha Lamaris, who actually lives down in Santa Cruz, I think. In her poem, Small Kindnesses, she says, or wonders, what if they are the true dwelling of the holy? What if they are the true dwelling of the holy? These fleeting temples we make together when we say things like, here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat. The temple in which we meet can be, but need not be, a physical dwelling. The temple is within you, and the moments of meeting another are moments of awakening truths about the world and about yourself. To find a temple inside your life, you don't have to leave your life. You don't have to become a monk. You find a temple in the life you have. You can start right here, now. You start by welcoming what is. Welcoming blossoming trees, welcoming chickadees, welcome friend. We tend to resist our lives. How many universes has it taken to get each of us right here? Here is what we have. And here, Tarrant tells us, is good enough. So when you practice not doing, one of the things you are not doing is approaching relationships from the standpoint of assessing them, judging them, good or bad. Whether it's a relationship with yourself, within yourself, or another, or the world. The beginning of awakening is to be curious about yourself or another or the world, as these relationships come to you here and now. On the other hand, we don't have to be experts at relationship. We are apprentices. We need not blame ourselves or the other person if we have a fight or misunderstanding. We can be curious instead. The poet Adrienne Rich offers valuable insights into human relationships. She says, an honorable human relationship, that is, one in which two people have the right to use the word love, is a process, delicate, violent, often terrifying to both persons involved. It's a process of refining the truths they can tell each other. That last phrase, a process of refining the truths they can tell each other, really stays with me. I'm thinking even in long-term relationships, we are still apprentices. Another comforting thought. Apprentices engaged in the successive refining bit by bit of the relationship. And the truths we tell don't have to be big truths. Little ones are good enough in this process of refining. I've been so impressed by this idea that a little poem came to me as a small example of telling small truths and refining a relationship. And so I wrote it down. It's dedicated to Alan, who's right there, with whom I have been refining a relationship for some 30 years. It's called Walking Together for Alan. He said, sorrel is a leafy green herb with a slightly sour taste, like the seasoning he put into the fresh tuna steak and artichoke dish we had last night for dinner. I said, sorrel is a horse with a reddish-brown color, like the one over there, standing in the stable between two rows of stalls. Through the opening at the far end, you can see behind him the spring green hills and the reservoir, not very full. You'll see brown earth exposed all along the edge, and the blue, unlike any other of the Northern California sky. This is what matters. Telling small truths about ourselves to each other, little by little, refining our relationship, our love. It's curious. In the brief exchange which I tried to capture in my poem, perhaps he and I together did make a fleeting temple, a fleeting dwelling of the holy. And even more curious, we were not doing anything much at all. Start by welcoming. Here is what we have, and here is good enough. So be it. What is that? I'm supposed to introduce something.
Thank you very, very much for that lovely message. And I want the name of the poem by Adrienne Rich, who's one of my favorite poets too. Oh, it's a part of her essay. Oh, okay. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This congregation depends entirely upon the generosity of its members and friends. All that we give in time, talent, and treasure is what sustains this community and makes it not just a sanctuary for us to return to for spiritual nourishment, but an oasis from which we can go out into the world carrying the waters of life. People at home, can donate by going to our website at nvuu.org and clicking on the yellow donate button on the left-hand side, or send a check to NVUU at 1625 Salvador Avenue. or attend a cottage meeting and start thinking about your pledge, which we are about. You should have received a letter this month. And we'll now gratefully receive our offering.